Morning, everybody. I'm Ron Kim. I'm here to moderate the panel on AI. I'll just give a minute. Thank you to John Wang for having me here and having the panel here. A wonderful event. Just from a quick intro standpoint, I won't go into a lot of details, but I'm an independent AI and tech consultant. Most recently, I was the global CTO of Merck, the pharmaceutical company. There's more information in the booklet. One of the things I thought was really timely was the term AI now is kind of difficult to pin down. Technology is changing so quickly. The term AI and agentic is used almost everywhere. In fact, I would challenge anybody to find any software that didn't call itself AI or agentic. So really, honestly, try and find something. So I'm really excited with the panelists that we have here to give their perspectives to help talk through this and cut through the clutter. So I'll ask the panelists to come to stage, and I'll let them give a quick intro. Okay, so Ken, we'll just go down the line. So Ken, why don't you give a quick intro, and then we'll go just hit the button.
Yes, hi, good morning. My name is Ken Takeshita. And until very recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was the head of R&D at Daiichi, a pharmaceutical company. And our claim to fame was a class of cancer drugs called antibody drugs.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Excellent, excellent. Thank you. My name is Miglani. I spent about 30 years in healthcare. I was at Pfizer for about 20 plus years. In the last few years, we have an early stage healthcare technology company based out of Princeton, New Jersey. So thank you.
Vejay?
Hey everyone, great to be here today. I'm a lawyer. I've practicing for 26 years. Started my career about half of it media entertainment. I then spent the last 10 years representing both public and startup technology companies in Silicon Valley. I've now married the two, and I'm at a firm that has half consultants and half lawyers, and we represent both mid-stage and early-stage venture-backed companies as well as public companies across fintech, health tech, and consumer tech entertainment.
Okay, great. And Ken and Bob and Vijay and I were able to speak a week and a half ago, also right before this event, and just really excited about the expertise we have up here. So I'm going to go around a couple rounds of questions. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And I'm not going to any particular order, but Bob, we're going to start with you. Coming from your healthcare background, we talk about AI's impact on the healthcare system. But more importantly, how are you viewing the benefits or the impacts to the actual patient?
No, it's a great question. You know, healthcare has changed a lot over the last 20 years. We've gone from primary care to specialty care. Primary care has become commoditized. So what we've seen is, the good news is for the patient, this means more information about their condition, about the kind of treatments that they're having. So if a patient goes to a doctor today, it's not about just taking a statin and here's your pill and your cholesterol will be lowered. You've got to draw blood, go to a center, diffuse it with something else. You've got to take a number of steps to get the treatment. And so the good news is for the patient is that because the doctor doesn't have time to explain everything, right? Doctors have 5 minutes with the typical patient, and the patient goes home overwhelmed and confused. And so now the patient goes to ChatGPT, they put in their condition, they get a full understanding of their condition, their disease, about the treatment protocol, what they have to do. So that's a good news for a patient, but on the other hand, there's two big problems. Number one, they get overwhelmed. It's too much information. And then when you add in the layer of social media influencers, I don't know if anybody heard of Brian Johnson. He's a Live Forever guy. Great guy, I follow him on social myself. But he comes out with something that says, this is not the protocol to do. So patients get overwhelmed, they get confused. And then, you know, the other part of this whole thing is they don't move forward. When you have too much information, patients get stuck. And so the good news is, yes, there's more information because doctors don't have time to explain diseases. But the bad news is patients continue to get stuck because having more information doesn't mean you move forward. It doesn't nudge you forward. And so what we see in our world is that patients are not starting therapies as soon as they really should because, one, certainly their copays are very high. So many medicines today are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gene therapies for $1 million. And so patients don't start. And what happens is they don't start, they don't get the outcome that they need. And the second, and the impact of that is on generally in the pharmaceutical industry and doctors is they lose revenue as a result of patients not starting. And so, and then this bigger issue I think Uni mentioned earlier was also trust. Patients trust their doctor. They don't necessarily trust AI. And we've seen this time and time again. We do video cloning of doctors, explaining various diseases, and we send it to a set of patients. We do authentic videos of doctors, and we send it to other set of patients. And the ones with the AI, patients dismiss. Too fancy, too much, I don't like it. Versus the authentic doctor sitting behind her desk in her clinic explaining something on a video that's very, like standard def SD. Patients like it because it's real and it's authentic. So we're seeing the good news, which is that patients are more informed than ever. But the bad news is there's a trust problem and also a confusion problem. That's kind of what we're seeing.
Okay, thank you. I want to move to Vejay and a little bit dovetailing on some of the themes that Bob talked about, cutting through the clutter and things like that. So Vejay, I wanted to know, you're advising a lot of companies, how many of them or are any of them getting to real material value versus, we know many companies, once ChatGPT came out, started launching all these pilots and it felt like they were a never-ending pilot cycle. Are people getting to real value, and what advice do you have for companies moving forward for getting to that value now that we're 3 years removed from ChatGPT's introduction?
Yeah, of course. I will say about the doctors, I've had 4 doctors in my family, they hate ChatGPT. And I want to make a couple observations that we heard earlier, because I think it dovetails to the answer I want to give. But number one, just saying the Portrait is my favorite product in my house. I have 4 of them. We don't have a TV, but I'm using it more so. And can't wait for more AI enablement in that product. But the other 2 things I was thinking about when you spoke, one was who wins that whole sort of hardware to immersive experience gap, and we think about sort of like this transition with Apple yesterday, and think about sort of like if Siri doesn't start to get where it needs to go, it's not gonna be the thing we're carrying things in, right? The third thing I say, and Bob mentioned this, is the trust, and I think that's where, like, to answer your question, last year I spoke at a panel in Tech Week in San Francisco, and I thought one of the VCs nailed it last year, saying everyone's out there in the desert, their CEO told them to use AI, and they're with a shovel and they're digging a hole, and they think they're digging their own hole, right? They throw the shovel and they walk away. I thought that was a great analogy. I do think we're past that.
Yeah.
I think that people realize inevitably they need to use it. I also think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of AI washing going on. So like you see a lot of stats right now. I think there's a McKinsey study that says 70 to 80% of people are using AI. But again, for the conversation we just heard, what does that mean? It's really sort of, is it really querying ChatGPT? To me, there's a gap between sort of like the bigger companies that are sort of building into their workflows right now versus sort of using it for knowledge-based inquiries. And then you have to think about it in terms of like mom and pop versus multinational and industry specific, right? So if you are in healthcare or you're in financial services, you need to think about how you're building those workflows in with security in mind, with governance in mind. And if you were a mom and pop, you have to think about sort of the same things, but I think you're seeing more usage and knowledge versus actual workflow. And just to sort of talk about law firms for a second, like we are obviously figuring this out. There are plenty of people who are sending me things that they developed on ChatGPT and saying, hey, take a look at this. Sometimes I'm like, this is fun, go have fun. And sometimes it's like, wow, we really need to think about the industry issues that you just missed here, and the strategy that's not being overlaid on top of that. So the short answer is, like, I think we're sort of moving past pilot failure, but we're not really at wide-scale adoption and value creation yet, in the sense that people are still trying to figure out how to build agentic into their workforce and how people, organizationally use it and adopt it, where it becomes, this sort of like flywheel of productivity, and I just don't think we're at that flywheel stage yet. I represent a lot of early stage AI companies, and just having that conversation with larger companies in terms of like, this is how you can actually maximize ROI, is still a conversation that has some pretty disjointed areas, and a lot of focus on cyber, which is good, but also is slowing down that sort of facilitator process.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I mentioned this in my opening comment, just around the terminology and how it's being used. I mean, I as an example, it dovetails on your comments. I work with I'm consulting with two companies right now, and they both said, we've embraced AI. And one of them is completely transforming and changing business processes, just doing things, radically different, things they couldn't do before, right? They said they embraced AI. I said, well, that makes sense. It really does look like you have done that. The other company just gives their employees Microsoft Copilot. And they say, we've embraced AI. So my point is, look, those two things both have value, but they're really different flavors. So when you hear companies saying we're embracing AI, it could mean one of many, many things. So to that end, Ken, I wanted to, some of us on stage, probably all of us spent some time in the pharma space. People may not realize AI has been applied in some form for many years, or even decades in the pharma space. And back to the hype theme, we've seen headlines such as, AI will create a cancer vaccine in 48 hours. I don't know that I've seen that yet, but what should we really expect in this space? What's reasonable to expect, and what is progress in your opinion?
Yes, thanks. So Ron, thanks for the question. So I think in the healthcare field, we are already far beyond the level of a co-pilot for checking. I think it's important to note that with this AI technology, the field has moved to a situation where results of an AI analysis is trustworthy and is actually good, because people have taken care to make sure data that's being accessed by AI is reliable. So even on daily practice for a physician, it's already there, even though most of you, even a physician, is unaware that it's already there. So a good example would be X-rays. If you go to a doctor and get an X-ray, just a surface, you think that there's a radiologist somewhere looking at your X-ray film and making some sort of an assessment of diagnosis. In many hospitals, that's not happening. You do have a radiologist looking at the film, but you also have in the back some AI technology that is also looking at the exact same image and making I wouldn't say a diagnosis, but a highly analyzed, skilled assessment of images, making suggestions to the radiologist about a particular diagnosis that a radiologist often cannot see. It's very important. So in many ways, AI is better than radiologists. It has become a very important part of a daily clinical practice. So, and even in healthcare and pharma field, what we're doing now is we're not using a ChatGPT to understand drug. We have access now to huge amounts of data. These are patient-level data that hospitals have collected, physical exams, blood tests, X-rays, CT scans, and how drugs interact with those patients, whether it's standard care prescription drugs or experimental drugs like cancer drugs that we're all developing. And you can understand how new drugs interact in those patients. And so you mentioned these cancer vaccines in 48 hours. That is almost becoming a reality, because there are companies that are looking at cancer DNA, sequencing the DNA of these cancers, and through complex AI algorithms, they can predict which mutations are likely to result in a meaningful immune response to that cancer, and thereby create a vaccine that incorporates that mutation into the vaccine. And so that's happening right now, actually, in the form of clinical trials. And we may see the results of that pretty soon.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Bob, back to you. Obviously, all of us are encountering a lot of different challenges and potential business problems to be addressed with AI. What's the big problem you're working on that you're aware of where AI can help?
Well, I think the big one is, I think to Ken's point is, for us, if medicine is going to be customized, for you. The complexity of delivering that medication, that medicine, is enormous. And understanding what to do, what not to do when you're in that patient journey is really is more complex for the patient. They have clinical concerns, cost. There's a gene therapy that's $2 million. $2 million. So when the doctor diagnoses you and says, hey, I've got this great therapy, it's going to treat your sickle cell disease, okay? It's going to treat it. But you've got to figure it out, the journey out yourself. And the journey is, do I freeze my eggs before I start this therapy? You get blood drawn, you go to a special center. And so there's a massive patient confusion crisis when it comes to customized medications being delivered to patients. The good news is we have the medications, but the bad news is it's complicated. And guess what? They're not making any more doctors. No one's going to medical school. So guess what? We have a shortage of doctors in America. And therefore, you have also a corporatization of healthcare. So you have private equities that tells the dermatologist, you have 3 minutes per patient. 3 minutes, your time. And so you've got a crisis here. You've got a lot of complex therapies, treatments, disease, more than ever. 92% of the FDA approvals in the last 5 years have been in oncology, neurology, autoimmune, or rare disease, or something called ultra-rare disease. I don't know if you guys heard about these. But 92% of medications are complex. And so when the patient goes to the doctor, and the doctor diagnoses the condition, the patient's very confused, and they go home, they're overwhelmed emotionally with this condition, and then they're supposed to figure out, what do I do next? And this is the problem, what we're working on. What we do, the solution for us is, we've got to educate the patient from the source that matters most, which is the doctor. But the doctors don't have time. So what we do is we help the doctor create a whole series of content, personalized content and videos initially, and that's sent on a text message to the phone. It's actually a carousel. It's very, very clean, modern technology to the patient's phone, and it's sent throughout the journey. So the patient knows what to expect when they go home, what they expect before the first infusion, for example, side effects they're going to encounter, because a lot of patients drop. And so this is good for, number one, the patient, of course. The second is from the doctor. Patients are on the therapy, and he doesn't or she doesn't get phone calls saying, what am I supposed to do next, doc? What am I supposed to do next? And the pharmaceutical sponsor, who loses revenue, $100,000 a patient, $500,000 a patient per day, the patient doesn't take it. So they recover that revenue. So the real problem we see is in complexity is people get stuck. Yep. And they need a nudge forward. Information is not that much. Yep. It's that human connection between the doctor and the patient that we lost. Doctors don't even know who we are anymore when we go to them. Right? If you're lucky, your doctor knows you. But most patients go to ZocDoc. If you're in New York City, they go to ZocDoc, find a doctor, then they go to the doctor does a procedure, a commoditization of the procedure, and then you go home. And you write a review, right? So what we're trying to do is to bring humanity back to healthcare in a scalable way. And the way we deploy AI is not on the doctor's face and all that. That's all content that's trusted and is real of the doctor. But in the delivery of such content, AI powers that patient journey. Yep. On the text message. So it's AI, informed AI, utilizing that doctor's data, the doctor's content, and the patient is texting back and forth the doctor for information, and it's the doctor's, because the AI powering that content, and that's kind of what we work on. But we think what we're trying to do is really humanize healthcare moving forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. Vijay, I'd love to get your take on a little different part of the AI, and it's a little more, and given you have a fascinating background of working at the intersection of technology and law, legality, I'd love to get your take on some of the risks of AI and more so how enterprises are dealing with them. Particularly, there's three in my head. One is obviously cyber risk, which you mentioned up front. The second is around copyright risk. So companies using Gen AI to author documents. Is that okay? I mean, some of that material from the LLM may be copyrighted somewhere else. And then third, related is just IP. How do I, if I'm using tools that have LLM models, what do I need to think about to make sure they're not taking my data and putting that into their LLM, et cetera? So I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, of course, great question. Let's start with IP and copyright. I would say Going back to your first question, the areas that I see the most explosion in terms of actual adoption are marketing and cooking, right? You're seeing a lot more pace in both of those areas of AI adoption, use, and efficacy, I think, in enterprise. Now, when you think about those, you think about IP, and you think about copyright, do I care if I created a marketing campaign twice as fast? If I don't own the copyright in that marketing content, I might not care. Do I care if I can code twice as fast if I'm coding non-essential core, non-IP aspects of my engine and product? I don't care. Now, there is leakage issues, there's things you have to think about, like what kind of version of a product are you using? Are your employees actually using the right sort of tools, and is it safe and all of that in that environment? Are they just doing whatever they want? You don't know that they're doing that. I'd say that's happening a lot, which is creating a leakage issue. And I think there is a gap between policy and governance and this IP leakage issue, which is like, I was on the phone with the CEO yesterday saying like, do you have a policy? Yeah, we have a policy somewhere. And it's like, no. We need to think about what that policy says in order to actually train your employees to sort of like think about this so you move in the right direction on IP and cyber protection, right? And so as I think about it, because I represent a lot of folks in the creative world and I represent a lot of folks in the tech world, I think about it in terms of if you're really creating something, whether it's code or something more creative, and you really truly want to own that, you really need to think about that very different in terms of how you're using AI, right? Your outputs from a copyright perspective in the US are not protectable unless you're layering in a significant amount of human input into that creation or output. So you need to really think about sort of what that means in the context of IP ownership. If you really want to be Disney, you got to be thinking about that differently. I think you saw they did a partnership with OpenAI and then they haven't really done much with it. But and the video tool just kind of went away. But you know, you're seeing that tension in sort of like the lawsuits out there. We just, you know, sued a major model company on behalf of the music collective, and so like you know, you're seeing sort of rights sort of being sort of pushed and pulled in that direction. On the other hand, I think there are lots of ways where copyright may or may not matter. Ultimately, you do create new copyrights in transformative data sets, so that is something that a lot of my clients are thinking about as well. Just to give a couple examples, and I'll try to just quickly do cyber. I represent a company that is more in the theater business, and they're sort of hosting a tech-enabled entertainment experience. And when I dug in with the vendor about what tech was in there, it was like a digital movie. I'm like, okay, this is tech. Okay, and they're like, well, we're using AI to train content from a famous artist who's passed away, and we're gonna have get interactions one-on-one. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, let's talk about this. What are the rights here? Because we need to make sure we're thinking about the estate's rights versus what rights we may create in the ultimate creation, right? A totally different example, healthcare. I have a great startup called Vejay Health. You should look it up. What they do is like they think they actually help hospitals in their custom environment. This is how I segue into cyber. Test different models, whether it's from universities, so like Duke has a sepsis model, for example, where they create patient data sets, and they let them test it against, you know, high value use cases, right? And how they're doing that is really interesting because they're in the hospital's infrastructure, and so there's less cyber risk in that environment, so that's why you're seeing more AI infrastructure building versus sort of like tool subscriptions happening, and why the market's killing software right now. And so they do that, but they allow the hospitals to pull down different models with different rights attached to it. So I said, so look, you gotta actually think about yourself as a content library marketplace, right? Like you really need to build in data management the way that a TV studio might have, 10 years ago. And I'm like, wow, I'm kind of happy that my tech lawyer has an entertainment background here, right? So we're kind of grappling with all that in that environment in terms of like how do we think about IP risk, how do we think about cyber risk all at the same time, and are we building in someone's custom environment or not? And how does the cloud aspect of that create risk or not in that environment? In terms of cyber, I think that that is slowing down more regulated industries in some ways. Like as law firms, we're trying to figure out right now, our client data is the most important thing for us. Like how do we make sure that the tools we're using actually protect that data appropriately? As custody, I'd love to have a digital twin, but I'm not necessarily sure I can ethically. So we're really trying to figure that out in terms of, and again, thinking about data is like data in is that valuable data? How much of it do we have? Do we need to get it from somewhere else? We may have transaction data that's sort of pretty significant, but not the biggest law firm transaction data set, right? So how do we think about building the right set and the value set ultimately? I'm going back to, hey, we need to do more like, form development and sort of like actual knowledge management to make sure we have the right stuff going in. So when I'm pulling it, I'm getting the right stuff coming.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Vijay. I want to pivot the next couple of questions with a theme of AI's impact on careers. And I know people are thinking about that, so kind of question for you. We see a lot of headlines about AI is going to replace certain jobs. I know you obviously work with scientists extensively. That's even a job I've heard, AI can replace scientists, AI can replace software engineers. I'm old enough to remember when the pocket calculator came out, they said there'd be no more math teachers. Really, honestly, it really was like that. And I know AI is different, but really would love your perspective on how much can and will AI replace people, and B, how should people then be thinking about their own career to position themselves to be successful in this world of AI?
Okay, this is a very difficult and tricky question. So I'm just going to give you some speculations on what's happening, what I see now, and what I see 5 to 10 years from now. So what I'm seeing right now is that AI allows people to do their work faster and more efficiently. It's a huge time saver. So for example, when in a clinical trial, we have to write a clinical trial protocol, it's about 100 pages long. And a normal human being, up until recently, took a week or two to write up a good, solid first draft of that. AI can do that in about 10 seconds. It's an incredibly humbling experience to just watch AI produce lines and lines of words for a program. So far it's been a time saver, but in the future, I actually do think that we're going to need fewer numbers of people doing this kind of writing, and more people devoted to what I call thinking. Innovative thinking, which is what the pharmaceutical industry is really depending on. I just don't see it that's happening right now coming out of AI, because AI ultimately requires input of something from a human being, and that input is going to be the originator of innovation. So for a future, if you're a young person, that's where my focus will be. To focus on coming up with new ideas that AI can do.
Okay. And then, Bob, I want to continue the theme on careers. I mean, I know you spent about a quarter century close in Pfizer, sorry, yeah. But then you recently started your own company and are now, very recently, and are pretty heavily involved, as we heard from before, in a lot of AI initiatives. So how did you reinvent yourself? How did you make that move? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience here would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I was at Pfizer here in New York headquarters for about 23 years. And I got tired of corporate life, and I left about 10 years ago. And because I saw the world changing, and as a big company, Pfizer is wonderful, but it moves slowly, as for a lot of different things. So I left, and then I was doing some speaking, and then I encountered a person with a problem. My wife, she's an eye doctor, she's an optometrist in New Jersey where we live, and she had patients, parents. So she had kids come in, a lot of Asian kids in New Jersey where we are, and they all have myopia. Do you know what myopia is? It's kids are on devices all day long, and they're on screens, and so their eyes are getting worse and worse. And so what happens is over time, if you do this, kids get really bad in their 20s and 30s, and they're at risk for retinal detachments and other problems. So there's a new therapy that's been around for 20 years or so, and so it's out of pocket. So my wife, who's a really good doctor, starts explaining this to parents. And so she says, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Patel, Mr. Patel, your child has myopia, and they need to be on this therapy. In a 10-minute conversation, it goes back and forth, and they don't sign up their child for therapy because it's out of pocket. So she's frustrated that parents are not signing up their children onto this very important treatment. So over dinner, over conversations, she's saying, I'm so frustrated, I don't understand why these parents get into treatments that they need. And so as a curious person, and coming from Pfizer, I was like, well, what do you present to them? She said, oh, I give a clinical brochure, a clinical. I said, honey, this is not a medical problem, this is a marketing communication problem. She says, no, I'm a doctor, it's a medical problem. I said, no, this is a marketing problem. And so it began a journey of my wife and I working together, a doctor and a marketer, and really designing a way to better educate patients, not in the clinic, in the kitchen. Most healthcare decisions are made in the kitchen. That was our big aha moment. And so we started designing all this system that just today, the company, and we realized in her practice, it really helped her grow, sign-ups, get these kids on these therapies, parents were more educated on it. And that was the way I pivoted my career, was not to go and solve the world's problem, but to solve one person's problem in the office, practically speaking. I would write, I don't know anything about software development, but I would draw out the software and we would hire somebody to do it. I tested it with my wife and she'd say, this is crap, make it better, And that's when you get better and better. And so if I would say, if you want to reinvent your career, find a problem. You fall in love with a problem, and you fall in love, in my case, with my wife, who's my client, but you fall in love with one person who has that problem, and you try to solve that problem. And the goal is not to say, oh, how can AI sort of solve this problem? AI. Not everything is going to be about AI. It's going to be about a human solution that leverages and deploys AI. So that was the way I reinvented my career, and we started the company now about 5 years. We have a team in India, here in the US as well, and so that's the way I transitioned.
That's great. Okay, time for two more, then we're going to go to Q&A. Vijay, would love to get your take on all these models that are flying around, meaning what have you seen or what would you recommend in terms of, should companies really rely on these big frontier models? I know there's a lot of specialized models floating around. Also, should employees at a company have the freedom to choose their own models, or how much guardrails are around that? We'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. Just think back to earlier conversation where you were saying my co-pilot.
Yeah.
I think when I first started at my firm, sort of we were there, and then sort of oh, and some of the tools that we normally use, like our timekeeper tool has AI capabilities. Right? What are we doing here? And now we're sort of at a whole different phase of this, which is we're adopting what our clients are adopting, right? And we are a little bit stuck on governance and cyber and some of those things. Again, I think more highly regulated industries are going to have a different answer to this question, which is, I think you're seeing more consolidation. And then I think what you're seeing is we're going to use these 2 or 3 frontier models and then we're going to build certain infrastructure internally for high value use cases where we either think that's just more efficient, frankly, or ultimately it's going to create proprietary value. Right, and so I think the answer for the larger corporation is I think you're seeing more consolidation because it also helps with security and governance, and then you're seeing more building and infrastructure than lots of little tools, right? So again, just because it's easy for me on the legal side, I get pitched these things all day long as a lawyer to represent these legal tech companies. I just think there's massive fraud in that environment right now. I totally see law firms shifting more to cloud models than some of the hardness in the world that everybody's building. So that's just my view. On the guardrails piece, again, I think it's a little bit dependent on industry. I think you want to give some agency to your employees within guardrails, and there's a lot of CEOs I talk to that have just different philosophies on this.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's a risk question that you poke into in terms of how much risk are you willing to tolerate. Obviously, we see things like deepfakes becoming very, very good, and so that lends to some fear on the executive level in terms of somebody giving away the store to a video who they think is their CEO and something not their CEO. And so I think building a policy that works for the culture and we haven't talked about this a lot, but the culture and organization of a business and actually empowering those employees is going to be super critical. But also making sure that it's not a free-for-all, so that you don't have the IP leakage, you don't have the cyber risk, all the things that I already talked about.
Okay, good. And just to wrap up, Ken, I would love to get your take on, you're coming from a large organization. in these large organizations that are trying to move forward with AI initiatives and implementations, we know part of the problem is the technology issues to solve, but if those get solved, I would imagine you've seen cases where the people and organizational issues are causing as much or more difficulty. And I'd love your perspective on, is that true and how do you solve those?
Well, yes, that's actually true, at least in the organization that I was at. Because people have different levels of understanding of what AI can do. And there are people who need a lot of convincing. Here is the return on investment, here's what we can see, and how many millions of dollars you can invest in. That's probably one group of people. So people who are really unfamiliar with it. But then there's a separate set of people who are very familiar with AI in a particular technical field. And I think in my case, I would refer to all the PhDs that are really coming out of graduate schools. They have already exposed to AI in their graduate school training and postdoc training. So they come into our group and they are already using AI to solve already highly technical problems. Not the ChatGPT level problems, but much higher level, things like computer modeling of protein structures and how to fit small molecules into various molecules. So those people who are already trained in AI in their particular scientific field, they have a much easier job of understanding where to put AI. And it's a huge implementation of AI at least in my organization, much more in the research scientific field as opposed to much later marketing, clinical trial.
Okay, thanks, Ken. We have about 8 minutes for Q&A, so I'm going to open up the floor for people who have questions, and let's go from there. I guess I'll be the, do I say a number? Okay, why don't you start in the front row?
This question is for Dr. Ken. I'm a big data set guy. For the past 15, 20 years of collecting real world data. I love hearing you say that AI is close to finding a cure. From your perspective and your background, with all the data sets that I hear from hospitals that you're sharing, very curious, 3 to 5 years from your experience, is AI going to help us just find cool cures for a lot of treatments for a lot of illness around the world?
So I think in the future, I think you're absolutely correct that the winners in AI healthcare, at least in pharma, is going to be the people who have access to huge amounts of many different types of data. And when I say large amounts of data, we're not talking about 100 patients. We're talking about tens of thousands of patients that has all the many different types of data within. Not age, height, sex, ethnic background, blood test results, DNA results. All those things would really contribute to finding better treatments. Maybe not cures, but we're talking about people talk about precision medicine all the time, but we're talking about highly precise medicines tailored for that particular patient. I think that's going to happen next 5, 10 years.
Love it, thank you.
Okay. Oh, let's go there, right there, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Rock. This might be a question for Vijay, but I'll open this up. One of the challenges we have in the US is the sharing of data across state borders, for example, EMR. Working in blockchain and AI now, what's your opinion on solving that problem? Because if you have a whole country's worth of data on EMR, I think that'll unlock a lot more potential. But I believe there might be some regulatory or business guidelines that might prohibit that from happening. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. I'm not an expert on the specific state AI healthcare laws, but I know enough to be dangerous. I would say that similar to privacy, you have a real patchwork going on. Obviously, even on the chatbot side, you have certain states that don't allow you to use that in healthcare. And then you do have certain laws like in California with respect to what you just mentioned in terms of how you use data across industry and across hospital sets. My client that I mentioned earlier is sort of grappling with some of that now. I would say the advice that I generally have for my clients is sort of how do you think about the most stringent standard for your business model and how do you work towards that, right? And so if you're in the earlier stage of your business, you're not going to be able to spend all of your funds on compliance, but you can take steps towards that. And there are obviously situations where it's a gating item because what are the penalties, right? That's sort of like the first question that if I was not a lawyer, I would ask, what am I actually going to violate here? Is it civil? Is it criminal? Because if it's criminal, I'm not doing that, right? So, move towards compliance with respect to the state that's the most strict, so California or Illinois for biometrics is an example, and build processes and implement towards that. It is a challenge right now. It isn't sort of an area that can be completely solved. I think you have, without naming anyone, vendors in the space that are difficult, aggressive, and sort of litigious, and so you really do have to think about even what those terms are when you're using APIs or using other things in the medical record space, so you're doing that right. I think that answers your question in part, but hopefully some of the folks here can kind of get
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
out there.
I was just going to say that EHR companies don't play well. They don't
That's what I expected.
integrate with anyone.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest problem. I had a doctor tell me recently he has 10 different portals that he has to go into. And he went to Claude. He was so frustrated. And he lives here in New York. And over a weekend, he went to Claude and said, make me a Chrome plugin that grabs data from my EHR and puts it in portal 1, portal 2, portal 3, portal 4. And that's his workaround. Because EHR companies hate integration. They purposely destroy innovation because they want that monopoly of that demographic data, and they don't share it with anybody else. So I don't see it as legal aside, it's a business problem. They're dinosaurs, they have been around forever, and they've got that monopoly on that doctor's computer, and they don't want to let it go. Because if they let it go, but the problem is, AI is going to circumvent all that. Chrome plugin is a great example. A doctor created it over a weekend to solve one doctor's problem. Imagine what's possible with everyone else across the country.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Should we get the whole room? Okay. Yeah.
I think somebody in the middle there, Ron, you're missing. She was the first person in the middle row.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's go.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Mika Bondi. I'm also a lawyer, media, entertainment, tech, and IP. I wanted to ask a question around AI law, particularly as it relates to health and professional services. So lawyers are hearing a lot about legal tech and whether you play lawyer or not, through the technology, and the use of tools as a replacement potentially for judgment for professional services. We are hearing that also around doctors, and there's actually a new New York law, AI companion law, that relates to the use of AI for therapy-related services. So I just wanted to hear from all of you, where do you think the law is going with respect to using AI as a tool versus replacing your kind of professional services? And then what can all of us do in the interim? Because of course the laws are always going to be slow compared to where the technology is going.
I had a quick, and I know Vijay, you have I had a quick thought on that just to open up, is because I've had this discussion quite a bit. I'm of the minds, there certainly will be some jobs replaced, as with any new technology, right? But I really do think the end state for AI is that it's a force multiplier for an individual. And I think Bob or Vijay or maybe even Ken all said this, that look, you can use AI to do stuff better or do stuff that at a velocity you couldn't do before. And it can also remove some of the more mundane tasks so you can focus on higher level stuff. That's what I think. So I'm not a lawyer, but your question, I think there's some of that kind of very surface level legal language review that maybe could be replaced by LLMs, but I don't think lawyers are going to get replaced. I think they're just going to focus on better stuff. But
It's too bad because I have so many startup ideas right now for myself. I would say that recently there was a case where the Southern District of New York said that using a public LLM for your legal strategy was not privileged. And so as you think about a business, it's not just transactional, it's litigation oriented as well. You're defending your IP, you're doing other things. So whether if you're not using that, even if it's closed LLM at the direction of a lawyer, you may have privilege issues with respect to using software to replace your lawyer. So for litigators, that's a good thing. I would say that the laws continue to evolve on a state-by-state basis. And I don't believe that, I agree with what was just said, because I don't believe it's replacement. I believe it's sort of efficiency and strategy. I will say I had a client come to me recently and say, hey, I don't care if you subscribe to Cloud or I do, and I'm not really looking to reduce your monthly fixed spend. You're worth every penny that I'm spending on you on a monthly basis. But like, I want our playbook to go in, and I want the first drafts to come out, and then I want to have that conversation with you on the next phase of the contracting process. Because I'm trying to free myself up, frankly, from the initial, I'm stuck in the weeds all the time with the team, and I'd really rather not be. Now, we're going to do this because he's asked to do this. We haven't figured out exactly how yet, but, and my team is skeptical because they think it's actually going to create more returns. But we're trying that to figure out how we partner together with our clients using technology to be more efficient. So I do think that's where the conversations I'm having are. Do I think I don't see as many NDAs or small things day to day that I probably was seeing 2 years ago? Yes. Do I think that some people can handle that without me? Yes. Do I think some people are giving away rights and IP? Yes. So I think it's a mixed bag in terms of replacement right now.
Okay. In the interest of time, I want to make sure we're on time, so we'll have to wrap up here. However, I would encourage anybody who has questions can catch me or the panelists afterward. But we do have limited time. I want to keep us on schedule. But first of all, ultimately, this was supposed to be a baseline or state of the union about things going on in AI, what our company's struggling with, what's real, what's not. So hopefully this has been helpful for the rest of the day. I also really wanted to thank Vejay, Bob, and Ken for coming here and lending their expertise.
Thank you as well.
Happy to be here. So let's give the panel a hand.